They would not start a conflict with Yang Dongqing nor the Yang family. But there is still no need to remind him. Her father said that the sly old fox Beigong Ao of the Beigong family might also have foreseen some things. If Yang Dongqing made a blunder in the future, then he could only blame himself for his foolishness. Compared to Yang Dongqing, Beigong Ao was quite astute. He changed his stand at the crucial moment to support them in the past, and stood on the side of the winners. Furthermore, he sent Beigong Shuang to Dongyuan Pavilion to cultivate. This head of the Beigong family was indeed an astute person. As Yi Futian walked into Dongyuan Pavilion, many people bowed as they saw him. Pavilion Master. Lionian Sword Emperor. The numerous people who bowed were all practitioners who passed the trial and entered Dongyuan Pavilion. They revered Yi Futian, and there were even some who called him the white-haired Sword Emperor endearingly. Yi Futian would always nod his head as a form of reply. The Pavilion Master is really handsome, and is without parallel. He is the most extraordinary and exceptional being that I have ever seen. No one can compare to him, someone said in a low whisper. Even when it comes to talent, he is also unrivaled. If only I could become the Pavilion Master's cultivation partner, a young woman said with a dreamy smile on her face. A few people shot her contemptuous looks. This boy-crazy woman. The belle of the Beigong family is currently cultivating in Dongyuan Pavilion, and then there is still the elder princess of the Helian royal family. How can you even compare? Someone jokingly said. His unrestrained comment roused some laughter among the crowd. Ahem. A cold voice sounded out. Everyone turned to the source of the voice, and saw an elder flipping through an ancient scripture. The fact that he was a Runhuang practitioner instantly silenced everyone, especially when they knew that they were disturbing his cultivation. However, he had already attained the Runhuang grade. So why was he still on the lowest floor of Dongyuan Pavilion? Yi Futian walked toward the stairway, leading to the upper floors of Dongyuan Pavilion. Given his current cultivation level, the cultivation methods in the lower levels no longer had any value to him. Recently numerous people have joined Dongyuan Pavilion to cultivate, so Dongyuan Pavilion was quite crowded. Even though there was a limit to the number of people allowed in Dongyuan Pavilion, each floor still had quite a few people. With each floor that Yi Futian climbed, there would always be practitioners who would greet him as Pavilion Master. When Yi Futian arrived at one of the higher floors, someone shouted, Pavilion Master. Somewhere in the distance, Yi Futian saw a feminine silhouette lowering her arms while in the midst of performing some action, turned her head toward him, and called out, Pavilion Master Yi. Ah, Miss Shuang, you are here too, Yi Futian replied. Beigong Shuang nodded. I have just entered the Runhuang stage, and still have many questions regarding cultivation, so I have been staying in Dongyuan Pavilion, referring to ancient scriptures. Dongyuan Pavilion was indeed constructed by the great emperor. It's really all-encompassing. Indeed, one can learn a lot within Dongyuan Pavilion. Yi Futian nodded his head. Please continue reading then. With that, he continued to proceed to the higher floors. Unexpectedly, Yi Futian saw Beigong Shuang also stepping forward, following behind him. Is there anything else I can help you with, Miss Shuang? Yi Futian asked. I would like to see what the Pavilion Master is reading in Dongyuan Pavilion, and learn from you, Beigong Shuang said softly. However, if doing so would disturb Pavilion Master, then I shall not. Her voice was soft, gentle, and warm, and made people feel really comfortable. Yi Futian thought to himself, the Beigong family really knows how to choose their people. Do as you please, Yi Futian said as he smiled and walked up the stairs. Even though Yi Futian said to do as she pleased, Beigong Shuang did not hesitate, but rather closely followed Yi Futian up the stairs. Yi Futian felt a little perplexed. At any rate, Beigong Shuang was a practitioner who had already attained the Runhuang level. Nonetheless, he did not concern himself with her. He started reading the cultivation techniques that could be found in records in Dongyuan Pavilion. Beigong Shuang also quietly followed without troubling him. When Yi Futian finished reading a scripture, she would read it after. Whatever Yi Futian read, she would also read. This state of things continued for a few days. Even though Yi Futian wasn't too bothered by it, as time passed, he still felt baffled by her behavior. One day he paused his cultivation for a while, looked toward Beigong Shuang, and said, Miss Shuang, the cultivation techniques that I am learning are suited for my own great path, but they may not necessarily be compatible with you. Beigong Shuang nodded. I know. Yi Futian looked at her. While he was a bit annoyed, the beautiful face of hers made it impossible for him to really get angry at her. Was she really that dumb, or was she playing dumb? It is just that fundamentally cultivation should never be limited to our own great paths, since all great paths are alike. In the few days that I have been following Pavilion Master Yi, in reading these ancient scriptures, I have learned a lot, and my own cultivation has benefited greatly. Given this case, what is the issue? Beigong Shuang stated as she looked at Yi Futian. While that may be the case, would you not benefit more if you selected some volumes that were more appropriate for you? Yi Futian asked. I have ascended to the Runhuang stage not too long ago, so I really don't know what would suit me more or what I should read. Furthermore, Dongyuan Pavilion is so huge. Beigong Shuang looked at Yi Futian and said, Since Father gives Pavilion Master Yi high praise, I too naturally believe that Pavilion Master Yi's insights can be trusted, so I decided to follow you to cultivate together. If Pavilion Master Yi minds me, then I can stay a little further. I will only go ahead when you have finished reading the scriptures. As she finished her sentence, she really started moving toward the side without any sign of displeasure, maintaining a rather nonchalant expression. Yi Futian could not find the words to reply to this nor rebut her. He smiled and shook his head, and then left her side. He let Beigong Shuang be, and did not concern himself with her again. Indeed, Beigong Shuang kept a distance from Yi Futian, but like what she did previously, she looked through the volumes of scriptures that he read. After cultivating for a few more days, Yi Futian left. Afterward, when he returned to Dongyuan Pavilion to cultivate again, he brought Xiaqing Yuan along, and had her accompany him around. Yet completely out of his expectations, Beigong Shuang did not leave him, and still followed him around. Yi Futian really wanted to know exactly what she was thinking in that mind of hers. Beigong Shuang's behavior even attracted attention from other people in Dongyuan Pavilion, and this even spread outside of the pavilion, and became an exciting topic of conversation for many people in Dongyuan City. Stories of the beauty and the prodigy naturally spread the fastest. Furthermore, these rumors weren't constrained by the level of cultivation at all. The higher the level of cultivation of the practitioners involved, the greater the curiosity they sparked. In this case, it was especially so because the relationships were rather complex. The main characters seemed to be involved in a love triangle. This did provide some fuel for post-meal and post-tea conversation for the common folk. Although Yi Futian was a little bothered by it, it did enrich his boring days of cultivation to a certain extent. After all, cultivation was extremely dry. Time flew by quickly, and unconsciously a year had passed without Yi Futian ever leaving Dongyuan Pavilion. When the year 10046 of the Divine Prefecture calendar arrived, Emperor Helian, Yang Dongqing, and Beigong Ao visited Dongyuan Pavilion again. Yi Futian walked toward them in Dongyuan Pavilion, and the three people greeted him. Pavilion Master Yi. There is no need for formalities, my seniors, Yi Futian said, laughing. It's the first day of the year. What matters have drawn busy men, such as yourselves, to Dongyuan Pavilion. We actually made this trip for a specific reason. I'm sure Pavilion Master will know of it soon enough. Emperor Helian grinned. Yi Futian let out an expression of bafflement and surprise. The three major factions arrived at the same time for some reason. It seemed that this cause was something extraordinary, or else they would not have placed such importance on it. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian looked towards Emperor Helion, smiled and said, Senior Helion, please don't keep me on pins. I'm dying of curiosity. Emperor Helion smirked and said, All right then. Say, has Pavilion Master heard of the Eastern Deity Island? Yi Futian looked towards Emperor Helion, smiled and said, Senior Helion, please don't keep me on pins. I'm dying of curiosity. Emperor Helion smirked and said, All right then. Say, has Pavilion Master heard of the Eastern Deity Island? Yi Futian shook his head. Naturally, he had not heard of such a place before. Among the numerous continents in the Donghua domain, there are some continents that are the pinnacle of power, and there are others that are filled with wonders. The Eastern Deity Island is located on the Penglai continent, which is a rather unique continent in the region that we are in. Emperor Helion explained to Yi Futian. They all discovered that this Yi Futian seemed to know extremely little about the outside world. He was unaware of even the existence of the Eastern Deity Island. Where in the heavens did this freak of nature come from? Penglai continent, Yi Futian muttered softly to himself. The continent on which Dongyuan Pavilion is located had no name. Since there were too many continents to count in the divine prefectures of the East, typically, continents would be unnamed. To the entire divine prefectures of the East, a place like a continent would be a tiny region. Hence there was no reason to give it a name. Emperor Helion nodded and said, Penglai continent is at the geographical center of the surrounding thousands of continents, and is hence extremely prosperous. Many exceedingly strong factions reside on that continent, and I don't mean factions like the Helion royal family, but rather massive factions that really have level 9 renhuangs leading them. However, the most important reason why Penglai continent is so famous isn't the existence of these top-tier factions, but rather the existence of the Eastern Deity Island. The owner of this island used to be an exceedingly powerful figure. It has been said that his cultivation level had reached the Emperor plane. So many people referred to him as Donglai Supreme Deity. He was also an apothecary grandmaster. Apothecary grandmasters are extremely rare in the world of cultivation. They are even much less common than blacksmith grandmasters. This has something to do with the elemental attributes of practitioners. Thus, this Donglai Supreme Deity was an extremely renowned figure in the past, with countless virtuosos often commissioning him to concoct elixirs for them. Alas, it was also because of this. He made some powerful enemies, and was eventually killed. Emperor Helion continued to elaborate. Thereafter, the Eastern Deity Island was hidden from sight for many years. It was only until Donghuang the Great unified the divine prefectures that the Eastern Deity Island resurfaced. Every decade practitioners from the Eastern Deity Island would proceed to the capitals of the surrounding continents to invite people to travel to the Eastern Deity Island to pursue their great paths. Coincidentally, it has been 10 years since they last extended an invitation, and so we have come early to wait for their arrival. Yi Futian nodded. So that was what it was. The divine prefecture was vast and endless, with countless varieties of life. Certainly, there would be numerous peculiar practitioners as well. Further considering the innumerable years of history of the divine prefecture, and the multitude of influential figures, the fact that such a place existed should be highly possible, and not at all unexpected. So what opportunities are there on the Eastern Deity Island? Yi Futian asked. Since they could invite people from thousands of continents over, there should be opportunities for cultivating the Great Path. There are many opportunities. The Eastern Deity Island has had years of inheritance. There was also Supreme Deity Penglai the Apothecary. So of course there are countless treasures and various opportunities for one to be enlightened about cultivating one's great path on the island. Hence, when the Eastern Deity Island is opened every 10 years, the Penglai continent would host a massive pageant for practitioners of the Great Way, and there would also be a grand trading convention. Emperor Helion continued. Yi Futian nodded his head in agreement. Although the strength of this continent did not seem great to him, at the very least, there were a few factions led by high-level renhuangs, and thus was certainly stronger than many realms among the 3,000 realms of the Great Path in the original realm. It was just that he had already caused such a large upheaval in the 9 realms, had set his sight on greater things, and had a high level of cultivation himself, so he didn't notice the existence of such an event. Nonetheless, he wondered how grand an event must be if people from thousands of continents attended at the same time. The divine prefecture was way vaster and more prosperous than the original realm. They could not even be compared. Furthermore, he had not even made contact with any faction at the pinnacle of power. The Eastern Deity Island should belong to that level. Still, he wondered about the strength of the most powerful figure on the Eastern Deity Island after the death of Supreme Deity Donglai. Will anyone from the Eastern Deity Island come today? Yi Futian queried. They should have arrived earlier. The people from the Eastern Deity Island have always been very punctual all these years, Emperor Helion replied. Well then, it seems like the Eastern Deity Island of today is still very rich in resources, eh? Yi Futian spoke softly. How much manpower did the island need to simultaneously send representatives to thousands of continents? Even considering that they made use of teleportation matrices, one could still tell that the Eastern Deity Island had numerous virtuosos. In the past century, the Eastern Deity Island had absorbed several practitioners with unusually high potential to cultivate on the island. In over 300 years, the Eastern Deity Island had opened its shores 30 times and attracted several influential people. So of course, they would have an abundance of resources. Furthermore, the Eastern Deity Island now very rarely communicates outside of its territory, so very few people know how strong they really are now. Some people guess that apart from the Supreme Deity Donglai, the Eastern Deity Island may already have fully recovered its full vitality, Emperor Helion said. Yi Futian nodded. He had become a little bit more excited. In the past few years, apart from settling matters in Dongyuan Pavilion, the only thing he did was cultivate. It was time for him to experience the world outside. Anyway, it was also a form of raising his cultivation level. At this point, Beigong Ao turned his head and looked outwards from Dongyuan Pavilion. Right after him, Emperor Helion and Yang Dongqing also turned their heads. They've come, Beigong Ao announced. Yi Futian also stared outwards into the distance. He sensed a strong aura moving towards him. Indeed, like what Emperor Helion said, they were very punctual. A column of women draped in white robes were walking on air, mist surrounding them. They had an aura that bore some semblance to those of deities. They were certainly extraordinary. The people around Dongyuan Pavilion all raised their heads and looked up towards them. Different from Yi Futian, they all guessed who had arrived. The goddesses of Eastern Deity Island arrived. The Eastern Deity Island has come to pay a visit. Yi Futian looked towards the source of the voice and spoke loudly. Welcome, goddesses. As he finished speaking, he saw the row of goddesses float straight into the airspace above Dongyuan Pavilion and swiftly landed beside Yi Futian. Yi Futian regarded the people from the Eastern Deity Island. They were all gorgeous women, in particular the leader of the group. It was as though she were an angel with otherworldly qualities who had descended from the 9 heavens into the moral realm. Apart from having a distinctive disposition, she also had exceedingly stunning features that could rival the top beauty of the Beigong family, Beigong Shuang. However, the two had completely different auras. It seems like the Eastern Deity Island did not only have opportunities for cultivating one's great path, it also had bewitching women. Yi Futian could sense the ethereal aura of the lead goddess that seemed to both exist and not at the same time. This woman had a similar level of cultivation to his, but her divine will might be unique. The lead goddess, similarly, was regarding Yi Futian. Yi Futian was at the front of the group gathered here, so of course, he would attract her attention. Could I ask, which among you is the Dongyuan Pavilion master? The goddess asked. Everyone looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian replied, that would be me. The host of goddesses looked at Yi Futian and let out an astonished expression. The eyes of the lead goddess also flickered. The pavilion master of Dongyuan Pavilion was only at the level of a lower Renhuang? The Eastern Deity Island will be opened after 15 days. We came today to invite the Dongyuan Pavilion master to come. This is the entrance pass. One of this allows you to bring 10 people along to the island. The lead goddess spoke to Yi Futian. Right after, an ancient pass flew towards Yi Futian and levitated beside him. Yi Futian accepted the pass and said to the lead goddess, all right, I will definitely go. MMM. The lead goddess nodded. Apologies for the disturbance. We will be leaving now. Goodbye, goddesses. Futian nodded. The goddesses then turned and left, leaving no trace of their presence behind. After they left, many practitioners standing around Dongyuan Pavilion were riled up in anticipation. Even if they could not step onto the island, they still hoped that they could at least go to Penglai continent to widen their horizons and witness the grand gathering of highly talented practitioners from various continents. Futian watched as the goddesses left. With the entrance pass in his hand, he muttered softly, "Only 10 people?" In this case, he had no choice but to only pick 2 or 3 people from the 3 main factions to accompany him. This is the rule set by the Eastern Deity Island. Otherwise, there would be too many people swarming towards the island at once, Beigong Ao said. In addition, once you have arrived at the Penglai Deity Island, you really have to keep that entrance pass safely, and you should not easily let other people know that you possess such a pass. Futian looked at Beigong Ao and said, "Robbery?" Beigong Ao nodded his head. The Eastern Deity Island allows admission only to those who possess the pass. Those who do not aren't allowed entry, regardless of who they are. Hence it is not uncommon to see fights break out over the possession of the entry pass. Every time this event occurs on Penglai Deity Island, there will always be a lot of contention happening. Setting aside the fact that you can bring people along and gain admission to the island with this pass, the pass also has a pretty high trading value. Futian understood. That was to say, even if one did not need to use it, they could also seize it to trade for other items. The Eastern Deity Island, naturally, would not interfere with these scuffles, because it was also a form of elimination. Although the passes are equally distributed among the various continents, ultimately, only the most qualified people will gain admission to the island. Am I considered among the 10 places? Futian asked. Nope. You can bring up to 10 people, Beigong Ao replied. Futian nodded. In this case, I only need 2 slots. As for the other 8 slots, Senior Helian and Senior Beigong can each bring 2 people. I'm sorry, Senior Yang, but you can only bring 1 person. I will surely compensate you for this unfairness next time. Of course, my seniors, you can bring more people if they aren't entering the Eastern Deity Island, but want to look around the Penglai continent. All right. Naturally, Emperor Helian and Beigong Ao did not have any issues with this distribution. While they had some thoughts, they kept them to themselves and did not express them at all. When Yang Dongqing heard Futian's words, he was stunned for a moment, but instantly recovered. Nonetheless, he felt unhappy. Only his Yang family had to bring 1 less person? Were they even lesser than the Beigong family? Very well. Pavilion Master, please allocate spots as you wish. Yang Dongqing also nodded, his voice revealing none of the anger he was feeling. Since everyone is agreeable, please start making preparations. We will head there directly, Futian announced. His sight briefly landed on Yang Dongqing for a moment before moving on. Futian did this on purpose to test him. If Yang Dongqing had any ill designs on him, then this trip to the Penglai continent will be Yang Dongqing's opportunity to act. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Having traveled to Dongyuan Pavilion, the 3 major factions have naturally already made sufficient preparations. After some matters in Dongyuan Pavilion were settled, the contingent of people departed in a grand fashion. For this trip, the 3 major factions each brought along people numbering in the teens. These practitioners had all achieved the Renhuang stage. Although technically practitioners in the Saint stage could also seek opportunities in Penglai continent, there weren't enough people to spare from Dongyuan Pavilion. Furthermore, opportunities for furthering one's cultivation was not even guaranteed for Renhuang level practitioners, let alone their juniors in the Saint and Sage levels. Having traveled to Dongyuan Pavilion, the 3 major factions have naturally already made sufficient preparations. After some matters in Dongyuan Pavilion were settled, the contingent of people departed in a grand fashion. For this trip, the 3 major factions each brought along people numbering in the teens. These practitioners had all achieved the Renhuang stage. Although technically practitioners in the Saint stage could also seek opportunities in Penglai continent, there weren't enough people to spare from Dongyuan Pavilion. Furthermore, opportunities for furthering one's cultivation was not even guaranteed for Runhuang level practitioners, let alone their juniors in the Saint and Sage levels. Under these conditions, naturally, only those with the highest chance of success would be departing. And so these people were all Runhuang level practitioners. In the empty space, the party of practitioners traveled majestically. They stood on a gigantic speed implement, beautiful, whizzing through the air at an incredible speed at all. Yi Futian stood in the middle of the crowd. She was also a cultivation prodigy, and little Condor behind him, carefully by on the left and right were Emperor Helian and Beigong. I have never asked Pavilion Master Yi before. Meanwhile, but with your exceptional talent, with the Yang family members at the solid background. Pavilion Master, why are you now in Dongyuan City? This loss has caused you some trouble during this period. Curiously, Beigong Ao spoke to the Emperor Helian who was beside him, as well as Yang Dongqing. The woman standing next to Beigong Ao was Beigong Shuang. They were also baffled by this. Yi Futian glanced at Beigong Shuang. Yi Futian did not even know about the existence of the Eastern Deity Island. He wondered if Beigong Ao was from a land far away, or if he was just pretending. Casually replied. How can it be? He did not continue to elaborate to cultivation, noticing that Yi Futian was not interested in continuing the conversation. Beigong Ao was clever on it, and did not press any further. She has been captivated by cultivating since she was a kid. The enigma. Beigong Ao smiled and nodded. The party casually talked about other topics. Then I shall have her contact Pavilion Master more often to further understand the Penglai continent. Surely this will also benefit her cultivation. Deity Island. Yi Futian looked at Beigong Ao. They have traveled outside the continent's territory. Yi Futian turned his slightly narrowed his eyes. Clouds and mists swirled around him. You old fox, and the spiritual chi was as dense as deity had always been very wafting about their feet. In his line of sight, he could spot another continent in the distance. Indeed, like what Yingqing said previously, continents were near each other. Furthermore, they were nothing like the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, where there was spatial turbulence between continents. In the Divine Prefecture, all the continents were like an entire body, hovering about in the endless universe, as though they were in the realm of deities. Yi Futian and the rest of the party did not land on that other continent, but rather proceeded on in the space above. As they traveled, they would often see continents that appeared as tiles floating about in space. Some levitated above them while others hovered below. It was quite the extraordinary sight. In the region around Penglai continent, there were already thousands of continents, and Penglai continent was only one continent in the Donghua domain. How many of these continents were there in the entire Donghua domain? Then, how many continents were there in the divine prefectures of the East? This number was way too big to be imagined, and the number of practitioners was also extremely huge. Among these many practitioners, he wondered how many influential and powerful figures would emerge. However, in the entire divine prefecture, there was only one great emperor. How powerful exactly was this great emperor? In a couple of days, while Yi Futian and the rest were still traveling in space, the number of virtuosos around them increased. Occasionally, they would see a cluster of practitioners traveling through space like them towards the same direction. Seeing these, everyone understood that they were about to arrive at their destination. The Penglai continent had garnered the attention of thousands of continents. There was no way to count the number of virtuosos who had rushed to the continent. Apart from the invited factions, many practitioners from the outer realms would also come on their own accord to seek their own cultivation opportunity. This grand event only occurred every decade, and is thus a chance not to be missed. Ahead, deity mist swirled around a large landmass. That would be the Penglai continent, Emperor Helian said to Yi Futian as he looked ahead. Yi Futian nodded. As the center of over 1,000 continents, Penglai continent was naturally extremely huge, its vast territory extending into the distance. Where is the Eastern Deity Island located on this continent? Yi Futian asked. There is an independent region on the Penglai continent that is known as the Penglai Deity region. There lies the entrance to the Eastern Deity Island. It is also the gathering location for this decennial grand event. In the Penglai Deity region, there is no top-tier faction governing the area. This is not because they are unable to do so, but rather because they intentionally created this power vacuum to make this area completely independent from the other regions in the Penglai continent. Every decade there will be a grand trading fair, Emperor Helion explained. Yi Futian nodded. The party gradually closed in on the continent. Finally, after spending 7 days traversing through empty space on their speed implement, they have arrived at Penglai continent. It was not the first time that Emperor Helion, or the other 2 heads of the family, had come to this continent, so they were familiar with the area, and thus continued to make their way to the gathering point. Around them, there were quite a few people, who, like them, were heading towards the Penglai deity region. The people below would occasionally raise their heads and look upwards. As they looked upon the virtuosos flying by above them, ripples coursed through their hearts. Regardless of the continent, the world of cultivation will forever be shaped like a pyramid. The higher the level of cultivation, the fewer the number of people. There were many Renhuang-level practitioners in the Divine Prefecture, because the base number of practitioners is enormous, and numerous people have cultivated for many years. Relative to the Renhuangs, there are even more people in the lower cultivation levels. Naturally, Penglai continent is no exception to this rule. Due to the occurrence of this grand event, many virtuosos from various places have come to gather on this continent. Seeing the gathering of so many virtuosos motivated the hearts of many lower-level practitioners, who all silently swore in their hearts that they would put in even more effort into cultivation, so that they might one day also be eligible to participate in this grand event. In the empty space above, a traveler heading in the same direction looked at Yi Futian's party and asked, "Are you all heading to the Penglai deity region convention?" Yi Futian and the rest looked over, and saw an elderly practitioner seated on a gourd, letting off an aura like that of a deity. Beigong-ao nodded his head and replied, "Did you all come at the invitation of the Eastern Deity Island? Where do you come from? Coincidentally, I am also heading there. Why don't we travel together?" The elder said with a smile, "We come from an unnamed continent and are here to train. How could we have been invited?" Beigong-ao replied with a faint smile, "Pavilion Master, I'm sure you still remember what we talked about the last time. The Eastern Deity entrance pass is extremely valuable. Many practitioners are not sent an invitation even though they are strong, and will look for opportunities to seize a pass from other people. This elder should be a casual cultivator, but his level of cultivation should be really high." Emperor Helion spoke telepathically to Yi Futian on the other side of the speed implement. Yi Futian naturally understood. He was the pavilion master of Dongyuan Pavilion, and only factions like the one that he was leading would be sent an invitation and given an Eastern Deity pass. When Beigong-ao intentionally hid the truth, he was guarding against the elder. The elder squinted his eyes, with a small gourd in his hands. He tilted his head backward and took a sip of rice wine from his gourd, sighed deeply and continued, No, it doesn't seem like that. I am not that old that my eyes are blurred. 3 high-level Renhuangs, tens of Renhuang-level virtuosos. You must be from some powerful cultivating faction from some continent. You did not tell this old man the truth." "Oh no, we wouldn't dare deceive our elders," Beigong-ao said, his smile still plastered to his face. However, it was obvious that the smiles from these 2 people were very fake. The elder turned his sight to Yi Futian and asked, "Well then, what identity do you hold? This is strange, very strange indeed." Given his experience, the elder naturally could, with just one look, tell that Yi Futian is the core figure in this group of people. He stood right in the middle of the group, and the 3 most powerful practitioners in the group stood around him. Furthermore, the few most beautiful women were also standing next to him. His status in the group was unquestionable. "I am Yi Lionian, a practitioner from an unnamed continent." "I don't have any status," Yi Futian laughed. "Since Old Senior is also going to Penglai Deity Island, and that we were brought together by fate, let's travel together. Just as well, I'm feeling a little peckish now. Perhaps I might have a cup of wine from you." When the elder heard Yi Futian's very casual and unguarded reply, some curiosity sparked in his eyes. As he regarded Yi Futian, he muttered softly, "Interesting." Yi Futian actually agreed to travel with him, invited him to travel together, and even wanted to ask for wine? Very interesting indeed. "Be wary of this man," a voice sounded out from afar. A group of people rushed over from behind. The leader of the group is a middle-aged woman, who was giving off a bone-chilling intent to kill. She glared at the elder and said, "Return my Eastern deity pass." The elder glanced at that woman behind him and said, "Since when did I take your Eastern deity pass?" "You." Everyone stared at the elder. This old man obviously stole the Eastern deity pass, yet he refused to admit it. "What about me? At the very least, I am a lot older than you. Do you not know how to address me with a little more respect?" Indeed, once a woman becomes older, her temper grows with her age. The elder spoke flatly. The middle-aged woman's face was as white as frost, and she let out a wisp of a cold aura. Looking at Futian and his group, she said, "Everyone, this old geezer stole my Eastern deity pass. And that is his motive for getting close to you. How about let's join hands and take him down? It is not wise to interfere in the business of others." Emperor Helion telepathically spoke, worried that Futian may try to be a good Samaritan and help the woman. Of course, Futian understood this. It wasn't that he was afraid of trouble. It was just that the elder didn't seem to have harmed anyone. If these were the hidden rules of the Eastern Deity Island, then they should settle it with their own strength, and there was thus no need for him to interfere. "We are still hurrying, goodbye," Futian replied indifferently. He continued moving forward. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." The Punglai deity region was in the middle of the continent. It was shrouded by an incomparably dense spiritual qi. It felt as though one were in the deity realm. Legends had it that the Punglai deity region contained a natural matrix that drew in spiritual qi from the heavens and earth, a matrix laid out by the Donglai supreme deity in the past. This was originally the outer regions around the Eastern Deity Island, and it was part of the Eastern Deity Island territory. The Punglai deity region was in the middle of the continent. It was shrouded by an incomparably dense spiritual qi. It felt as though one were in the deity realm. Legends had it that the Punglai deity region contained a natural matrix that drew in spiritual qi from the heavens and earth, a matrix laid out by the Donglai supreme deity in the past. This was originally the outer regions around the Eastern Deity Island, and it was part of the Eastern Deity Island territory. In present times, the Punglai deity region was unbelievably flourishing, with people from over 1,000 continents gathered here. The number of practitioners was unimaginably large. In the empty space, Futian and his party were traversing the airspace above the Punglai deity region. In their surroundings, people were bustling about like a crowd of deities walking about in the air, making this Punglai deity region really seem like the realms of deities. Futian surveyed the entire region and observed the practitioners that came and went. Some were elders who gave off deity-like auras, and some were beautiful women that could bewitch anyone with a look. There were also powerful figures whose auras intimidated everyone, and cheeky youngsters who paid no attention to rules of courtesy. There were even monks and nuns. Every time the Eastern Deity Island opens, there will always be many people in the Punglai deity region. You can find all types of people here. Practitioners from the good faction, those from the evil faction. Basically, there will be a large number of practitioners of all types, Emperor Helion said softly. He instructed his people behind him. "While you are here, be careful and avoid getting yourself into trouble." Emperor Helion's subordinates nodded their heads. Among those from the Helion royal family who came, apart from Elder Princess Helion, there were other royal descendants and virtuosos from the royal family. There were still a few days before the Eastern Deity Island opened, so Emperor Helion decided to remind them. This was not their home continent. On that continent, they were the most powerful people. On the other hand, on this continent, they would not even know the background of any person, should they get into a fight with them. Furthermore, they might not even know who to take revenge on if anything happened. The divine prefecture was so vast. If their opponent left, where would they even start searching? Futian shifted his gaze below and saw many intricately built towers and houses, courtyards and pavilions. It was a scene of luxury and prosperity. Furthermore, he also noticed that many people had laid out their wares for trade in the pavilions. These traders could not be underestimated too. Futian took just a casual glance around and realized that those traders were actually Runhuang-level practitioners. In fact, it was extremely difficult to spot someone who was below the Runhuang stage. The reason for this was simple. Any weak practitioner would not dare take out any treasure to sell or trade. If they did and were targeted, they would have no means to protect themselves or their property. Is this how trading is done here? Yi Futian asked aloud. Nope. This is just one of the forms. There are many other very famous trading areas in the Punglai deity region, Emperor Helian explained. If anyone had a very valuable item to sell or trade, they would trade in those areas. However, they would release the information beforehand to give interested buyers and traders enough time to travel to the trading location. The most renowned trading location in the Punglai deity region is the Punglai deity lake, and it appears only every 10 years when the eastern deity island opens up to the rest of the world. Common treasures are not even eligible to be traded in that location. Anyone who wanted to trade there had to first have their treasures appraised, then assessed if their treasure was of a high enough grade, before being allowed to trade it in the area. Yi Futian nodded his head. Upon hearing this, he was indeed intrigued, and wanted to take a look around. After all, he did possess quite a few treasures himself. Well, let's go down then, Yi Futian said. While people were hurrying about in the skies above the Punglai deity region, it was even more bustling on the ground. The party landed on the ground, and walked on this deity realm-like land. There were no goose houses around, although there were a few inns that could only accommodate a few people. The fragrance of alcohol wafted from the sides of the pavement and pervaded the street. Apart from this, in this deity realm, the typical person had aesthetic features. When one cultivated to a high enough level, their bodies and auras would undergo a profound change. A woman would develop striking features, especially women who were born beautiful. They could be said to be very pleasing to the eyes. However, once they have cultivated to such a high level, the temptation of physical attractiveness would no longer be that great. Are you selling spirit herbs? Yi Futian looked towards the pavilion at the side. There was an old man in ragged clothes standing behind his stall. There was only one stalk of spirit herb. It was completely crimson, and it caused the air around it to be quite hot. Yi Futian could vaguely sense the will of fire contained within the herb. It was formed after being nourished by the will of a great path. Beigong Ao nodded and said, This spirit herb isn't of a high grade, so it should not be very valuable. However, to a practitioner at the Saint Plain, it would be extremely useful. Yi Futian nodded his head. In the past, when he was still in the original realm, he once traveled to the ocean path in the secret zone in the Shangxiao Divine Palace to cultivate further, and so he understood. The party continued moving forward. While they did see quite a number of valuable items, none of them interested Yi Futian. After all, he had seen much greater things and thus was not easily impressed. Why don't we go take a look at the Punglai deity lake? Yi Futian said. The party continued on their way, and came upon an ethereal mountain. Around the mountain, there were matrices laid out, and even highly skilled practitioners standing guard. Do you all want to go in with me or? Yi Futian asked as he looked at Emperor Helian and the rest. I will also go in and take a look. Emperor Helian smiled and said. After giving out instructions to his people behind him, he just brought along 2 people. Beigong Ao and Yang Dongqing did the same. 11 people continued proceeding forward. And these 11 people were the same people who were going to enter the eastern deity island, while the others waited outside. At the stairway to Deity Lake, someone lightly bowed to them, smiled and said, Distinguished guests. Yi Futian and the rest naturally understood what the person meant. Everyone who came here understood the rules. Yi Futian took out an entrance pass and asked, Will this be fine? Yes, of course. The person smiled. Please proceed. The entrance pass that Yi Futian retrieved was the Eastern Deity Entrance Pass. This item could be used to trade for things, and it could fetch quite a high price too. The pass also proved that Yi Futian and his party had been extended the invitation, and were thus allowed to enter. As they walked upwards, they could feel that the region gathered the essence of the heavens and earth, and spiritual qi was concentrated to an unbelievable extent. In a luxurious pavilion, there was a deity lake, in which the aura of deities pervaded. Around Deity Lake, There were many extraordinary figures trading items. While there weren't many people here, those who were here had cultivation levels and auras that far surpassed those who were outside this area. The Punglai deity lake was 5 kilometers long. This pavilion inside was unbelievably extravagant. It was 100 meters tall, and was like a completely different world. On the two sides of Deity Lake were a couple of stalls. There were quite a few people who were seated cross-legged on the ground, and arranged in front of them were some treasures, most of which were pretty valuable. What is this? Yi Futian stopped at a certain stall. Laid out on the ground were 2 mirrors, from which Yi Futian unexpectedly sensed a slight ripple in the Great Path, and even a few wisps of spatial will of the Great Path. These are the Mother-Son Yuanyang mirrors, mirrors that are bound to each other. When 2 people simultaneously refine the mirrors, they will be able to see each other and communicate through the mirrors, even if they are separated by billions of continents. The stall owner exuded a deity-like aura and had an unusual air about him. He looked at Xiaoqing Yuan, who was standing beside Yi Futian, and said, "If my friend here and your missus lack these, they will be very useful to you." Yi Futian's expression shifted slightly. He did not know that such treasures existed. After all, he had never heard about them in the original realm. In the Divine Prefecture, blacksmith grandmasters cannot be matched by anyone in the original realm. In fact, they might not even be found in the original realm, and so many forging techniques have ceased to be passed on. If they had this item, it would make things very convenient for them. However, what caught Xiaoqing Yuan's attention was how the stall owner addressed her. She turned her beautiful eyes to the Yi Futian beside her, and noticed that he actually did not deny it. "What is the price?" Yi Futian asked. "A 9th-grade Runhuang implement." The stall owner stated his price. Practitioners in the Divine Prefecture aligned the grades of implements to cultivation levels, so there were 9 grades of implements. Thus, any 9th-grade Runhuang implement was a top-tier implement. "It's just a communication device. Surely it's not worth that much?" Yi Futian said. "Although this pair of Mother-Son Yuanyang mirrors is just a communication device, it is very difficult to forge them, and only blacksmith super grandmasters are able to do so. Even then, they need to be well versed in various elements of great paths, and have to use very rare materials in order to forge them. Thus, the item is extremely valuable, and only powerful figures in top-tier factions could afford to use this, making it a symbol of status. My friend, with just a look, I can tell that you are standing on the pinnacle of authority, and that you have an extraordinary aura. Your missus here is also no commoner. She looks absolutely stunning. Only people like yourselves are compatible with the item. Furthermore, it would be difficult to avoid being apart from your missus in the future. Should you encounter any trouble, this item would make it very easy for you to communicate with each other." The old stall owner had a very glib tongue. Yi Futian just felt that it was a pity. If he had obtained an item like this earlier, he could have left one for Jieyu. Indeed, as he said, while the item isn't particularly useful, it is very difficult to forge. Treasures like this are quite rare. Since it isn't very useful, there aren't that many that are made, and only the core disciples and top-tier factions will need to use them. Emperor Helian telepathically spoke to Yi Futian. Yi Futian also understood the logic. "Nonetheless, you can try bargaining," Emperor Helian said. Yi Futian looked at Xiaoqing Yuan. He saw that she too was staring at him, and it looked like she wanted the item. "We've been together all along, so we don't actually need this," Yi Futian said aloud. Upon hearing this, Emperor Helian, Beigong Ao, and the rest thought hard about his words. While the two of them had been together all along, Yi Futian had never explicitly explained their relationship. This was the first time he had done so. In that case, were they really cultivation partners? A slightly surprised look flashed across Xiaoqing Yuan's eyes. She lowered her head, slightly nodded, and let out a very delicate and soft sound. "Let's go." Yi Futian walked off. The old stall owner casually smiled and said, "Please do as you like, but there are a lot of people who came to Punglai Deity Lake this time, and they are all figures with very high status. There is only one pair of Mother-Son Yuanyang mirrors. If other people bought it, there would not be a second set left." Trading fundamentally was a psychological game. While Yi Futian expressed that he did not need it, he was really doing it to lower the price. Having been in the cultivation world for so many years, how could the stall owner not see through Yi Futian's mind tricks? While the lady had some intent to buy, she was a lot more concerned with what the man said. With one word from Yi Futian, she gave up on the thought. It was then up to her position in Yi Futian's heart. What a sly fox, Yi Futian thought to himself after hearing the old man speak. Indeed, the people here were all very shrewd. How about I trade cultivation techniques for this? Yi Futian asked. The old man shook his head. With his cultivation level, he could easily access places like the Dongyuan Pavilion, so he did not need cultivation techniques. As for the really powerful and secret techniques, the mother-son Yuanyang mirrors were not valuable enough, and he knew that. What about an 8th-grade implement? Yi Futian asked again. The old man still shook his head, shut his eyes and said, Since my friend here is insincere about buying, please leave. Old man, you win. Yi Futian turned around and walked to the old man. The old man revealed a smile and said, This old man can still read people very accurately. My young friend here looks like a very extraordinary person. I was certain that you could afford to trade in a 9th-grade implement. Furthermore, it's for the sake of your lady. Without saying anything, Yi Futian tossed him a storage ring. The old man used his divine consciousness to appraise the stored item, smiled and said, Yi Futian received the mother-son Yuanyang mirrors, and gave one of them to Xiaqing Yuan. Apart from Little Condor, only he and Xiaqing Yuan came to the divine prefecture. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. After obtaining the Zimu Yuanyang mirror, Yi Futian and Xiaqing Yuan used their divine consciousness to refine them on the spot. For an item that was so valuable, they naturally had to check it out on the spot. As expected, there was nothing wrong with it. After that, They put them away. Emperor Helion and the others looked at the two of them with a long and meaningful look. Replied with a gentle smile. That definitely confirmed the relationship here without an invite. If you want to head to the Eastern Deity Island, you will definitely need an Eastern Deity divine consciousness to refine them on the spot. For an item that was so valuable for you, since we naturally had to check it out on the spot. The old man's smile was so wide there was nothing wrong turned into a slit. After that, they put them away. That he was a very shrewd character, and the others looked at the two of them with a long and meaningful look. I am unable to provide the relationship between the two that is of an equivalent apart value. From that, in their eyes, Futian declined his offer had become with a smile. An unpredictable presence. The two of them went back and forth courteously, but without sincerity. Something all that was saw their exchange on the side family easily tell that it was very actually fake. Used by that is all right to exchange. The old man did not mind. Mirror. Then he said, with that, could they make the deduction an interesting and powerful character? The Ninth Order we might have an opportunity to meet again in the future. Than the Zimu Yuanyang I look forward to it. Then, replied Yi Futian. After that, he walked away from the old man level as him. Shortly after, Yi Futian had become even more mysterious in their eyes. Stopped in front of the old man's stall. Thoughtfully at the one who led the group was a handsome young man Futian with an exceptional aura. He directly around them also looked at Yi token from the old man. They had seen the trade as the young man prepared to earlier. The old man people wondered about Yi Futian's identity. It is easy to tell that you are a rich person. A person you have an exceptional aura. Bring out a ninth order ritual. I am sure you also have a not so normal family background. A simple person. Am I right? Young one, I am but a practitioner. Come over here and take a look? What is the point of talking about one's family background to continue his journey? The young man replied with a gentle smile. No need. True. The old man nodded with a gentle smile. But I have another Eastern deity token with me. Moving toward deity. Do you want to buy it as well? Beams of light the young man from who was just about to leave suddenly stopped in his tracks. These were the divine light. He turned around to look at the old man that came from treasures sizing him up seriously, and they made the old man only smile even more magnificent, squinting his eyes in the process. It was like a dreamland. It made it feel like he was very cunning. This old man looked harmless, filled with dazzling treasures. He was actually a hunter, and it was impossible to take in everything all at once. The old man definitely had more than two familiar deity tokens with him. The implications of this, there, drinking alcohol from a gourd. Even Yi Futian, a surprised and somewhat curious expression, appeared on Yi Futian's face and turned around. The old man he looked at the old man when entering the suddenly remembered that the old man asked had actually arrived the Eastern deity token. Moreover, when he was entering, he had already set up a stall within this Penglai deity. It seemed like his objectives were not that simple. What was made this old man was definitely a ruthless one of the items set up for trade in front of his stall. The young man shouted with a laugh after staring at the old man for some time. Said the old man with a chuckle as everyone around the area seemed to have been stunned for a bit. Their gazes shifted towards them. So it was him. Old Man Thousand Phantasms. Also known as Holy Hand Thousand Phantasms. This man could change in tens of thousands of ways, and was thus nicknamed Thousand Phantasms. It was not his real name. As for Holy Hands, it was also a title given by the people in the cultivation world. Since this old man was an infamous thief, he was coined the title Holy Hands. As for his methods of stealing, they were considered perfect or better yet miraculous. However, his reputation was not as bad as one would imagine. The reason was that even though Holy Hand Thousand Phantasms was a thief, he never hurt anyone. He thieved but with principles that he adhered to strictly. He was an oddball who mingled in the cultivation world for many years, to the point where many top figures in many continents had experienced his specialty before. As such, his reputation was not minor. In fact, one could even say he was extremely well known. Young Master Jun most certainly has a good eye, said the old man with a laugh. His words directly exposed the identity of the young man. In that instant, many of the people around the area were momentarily stunned again. Most of the practitioners who entered the Penglai deity region came from different continents, and thus were not only not well acquainted with each other, so they could be said to not know each other at all. However, with regard to the top factions on Penglai Deity Island, they knew it well. Since they came to the island, they naturally came prepared. There was a particular clan that one needed to know if one were to arrive at Penglai Deity Island. And it was Jun. It was a very powerful clan name. The cultivators of the Jun clan had long established themselves as one of the top factions of this continent. They completely dominated the Penglai continent, and were capable of influencing the other top clans within the Penglai continent. The young man's family name was Jun. Looking at his followers, it was not that hard to guess his identity. After all, Among the top factions on the Penglai continent, there was only one that had the family name Jun. It was easy to associate them together. So, looking at the young man's identity and age, it was highly likely that he was the young master of the Jun clan, Jun Qiuyan. Many people looked over at them with excitement. The Jun clan was extremely influential in this Penglai deity lake area as well. They were one of the factions that controlled the area behind the scenes. Jun Qian and Holy Hand Thousand Phantasms appearing in this location at the same time. The Penglai deity lake definitely lived up to its name of being a place with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. How many Eastern deity tokens do Mr. Thousand Phantasms have? Why don't you just bring them all out and give me a price? I have some resources with me, and I'd like to help Mr. Thousand Phantasms get rid of a few of them. Jun Qiuyan understood clearly that there was no way that his counterpart would only have one Eastern deity tokens on him after learning of his identity, who was Holy Hand Thousand Phantasms. He'd be ruining his reputation if he did not have at least 10 Eastern deity tokens on him. The old man smiled after hearing Jun Qiuyan's offer. He put his hands into his pocket and brought out a bunch of Eastern deity tokens. It was not a lot, but it was definitely not a few either, just 10 tokens. The cultivators in the surrounding area stared with their eyes wide open. This old bastard was certainly very ruthless. Since young Master Jun said so, I will be straight and give you my price, Holy Hand Thousand Phantasms said to Jun Qiuyan. Then, he mentioned the offer to Jun Qiuyan through voice transmission. After hearing his price, Jun Qiuyan's expression changed. Even though he was mentally prepared, he was still shocked by the conditions of the opposing side. Dear Elder, it is not easy to purchase so many Eastern deity tokens in bulk. Elder, your conditions have actually become more demanding when you are selling them in a bulk of 10. This is rather confusing for this young one, Jun Qiuyan said. That is fine. A trade requires consent from both sides after all. If the young master is not okay with it, it is natural that someone else will take it. This old man can wait a while. I heard that recently, the other top factions on the Penglai continent are also looking for the Eastern deity token. I will ask them later. The old man's eyes squinted into a slit. His words made Jun Qiuyan's pupils dilate. His gaze fixed on the old man. This old man, did he hear something? He thought. Naturally, what Jun Qiuyan said earlier was not true. The reason he was collecting those Eastern deity tokens was not to help the old man get rid of them. He had his personal uses for them. If the old man actually sold them to the other factions on the Penglai continent, it would be quite troublesome. Fine. I will take them all. Jun Qiuyan nodded and decisively agreed to the old man's demands. After that, he actually made that ridiculously huge payment. That scene made many around the area think, what did it mean for the future? Futian watched for a while before returning to search for the item he needed. He still had not found an item that he wanted. However, he saw a flower. It was a flower that was sealed in darkness. The flower kept opening and closing its petals, and the petals looked as if it was a face. And when it opened, it seemed as if it was going to devour people. What is this? Futian asked. Hell's Lotus, the owner of the stall replied. It has a powerful death aura and is extremely dangerous. It is a high-class Hell's Lotus. Even high-order Renhuang can use it to help their cultivation. Price? Futian asked. 1/8 order ritual implement. The owner replied as he looked at Futian. He was very direct. Futian looked at Xia Qingyuan and said, You cultivate the way of life and death. This can be used to help your cultivation. Refine it. Okay, Xia Qingyuan nodded. She did not decline. She felt a warmth in her heart. The 2 items that Futian traded were for her. Then at that time a voice appeared. Jun Qiuyan looked at the stall owner with a gentle smile and asked, Could you leave this treasure to me? Futian squinted slightly after hearing his question. He turned around to look at Jun Qiuyan. However, Jun Qiuyan did not look at him. Instead, he was still looking at the stall owner with a smile on his face. Since young Master Jun asked, there is naturally no problem. The stall owner was also a practitioner from the Penglai continent. All right. Jun Qiuyan paid with the ritual implement directly and went to get his item. Yi Futian said indifferently. Could I ask what your intention is? Jun Qiuyan received the treasure and turned around. He faced Yi Futian and took his question with a smile. Then, he passed the treasure to Yi Futian and said, Consider this my gift to you. Let's be friends. Friends? Yi Futian was slightly stunned. He was surprised. However, the guy bought an item and gifted it to him. Unfortunately, this likely meant that his true objective was not simple. Yes, Jun Qiuyan nodded. There are only a few days left before the Eastern Deity Island opens. By then, who knows how many genius and monsters will step onto the island. I saw that you have an exceptional aura, and I believe that you are not some common folk. So, I would like to ask if you would accompany me after we get onto the Eastern Deity Island? Yi Futian finally understood after hearing Jun Qiuyan's proposal, so he bought and gifted this treasure to him to buy him out, so that he, after entering the Eastern Deity Island, would follow him. This also meant that, after they got on the Eastern Deity Island, he would have to follow Jun Qiuyan. A member of the Jun clan, Emperor Helion, who was beside Yi Futian, transmitted his voice to him. Before they arrived at the Penglai deity region, they had briefly talked about the top factions on the Penglai continent, and among them was the Jun clan. This Jun Qiuyan was, naturally, one of the young masters of the Jun clan. A member of the Jun clan, Emperor Helion, who was beside Yi Futian, transmitted his voice to him. Before they arrived at the Penglai deity region, they had briefly talked about the top factions on the Penglai continent, and among them was the Jun clan. This Jun Qiuyan was, naturally, one of the young masters of the Jun clan. Yi Futian sized him up using his eyes. This Jun Qiuyan looked to be about his age, so their cultivation level should be quite similar. Naturally, his presence and aura were outstanding. Otherwise, he would not have purchased so many Eastern deity tokens over here, and tried to buy Yi Futian out, and have him become his follower. It was not difficult to guess his intentions. Jun Qiuyan wanted to use the Eastern deity tokens to gather a group of people to enter the Eastern Deity Island with him. One Eastern Deity token would allow him to bring 10 people. If he gathered a huge number of Eastern Deity tokens, it was natural that he would be able to bring a lot of cultivators with him. By buying off some other followers, he would become one of the most powerful groups that entered the Eastern Deity Island. It seemed like these top Penglai continent factions were already preparing for their entry on the Eastern Deity Island. No need. I saw this Hell's Lotus first. Could you leave it for me? Yi Futian smiled and answered Jun Qiuyan. He did not get angry but asked politely. Not even considering it? Jun Qiuyan asked. He looked toward some of the other cultivators beside him and said, Over these past few days, people from many continents have come to gather here in Penglai. I am sure you are the same. Some of these people with me are practitioners from all continents. We can help take care of each other if we stay together. Thank you, replied Yi Futian. Then he followed up and said, But I am used to working alongside my friends. However, your kindness is very much appreciated. Jun Qiuyan looked thoughtfully at Yi Futian. His body stopped moving for a brief moment, and the atmosphere seemed a little tense. However, it did not last long as in the next moment. Jun Qiuyan smiled and returned this Hell's Lotus to the stall owner and said, I will leave it to him. However, the stall owner did not dare to offend Jun Qiuyan. After the stall owner exchanged the item with Jun Qiuyan, Yi Futian looked at the owner. However, the stall owner smiled and said, I apologize, but the Hell's Lotus is no longer for sale. A sharp light flashed across Yi Futian's eyes. He glanced at the stall owner. After the stall owner finished speaking, a raging aura emanated from Little Condor's body. Its eyes were filled with an intense and sharp aura. Even he could see why the owner refused to sell. His master was actually humiliated in this Penglai deity lake. I don't want it anymore, Xia Qingyuan said to Yi Futian. Naturally, she knew that the Hell's Lotus was to help her cultivate. However, would have expected a problem to arise from this. They came to an agreement to purchase it first before Jun Qiuyan cut in line to snatch it away. The stall owner did not hesitate at all in the process, and handed the item to Jun Qiuyan. Now, Jun Qiuyan gave up, but the stall owner was still worried about offending him. As such, he did not dare to trade with them. She naturally knew that Yi Futian was a proud person, and the stall owner's action was most definitely trampling on Yi Futian's dignity and reputation. As such, she was infuriated. Even if the stall owner were willing to trade, she would no longer want it. Yi Futian looked at the stall owner and smiled. Then he said, "You sure have no principles when it comes to business." After that, he turned around and left the place. He did not waste time chit-chatting there. This was the Penglai deity lake, which the major factions of the Penglai continent controlled. If they did not want to trade, there was nothing he could do. Everyone glanced coldly at the stall owner before leaving. Only Black Wind Condor continued to glare fiercely at him. The stall owner did not mind, and looked calmly at Little Condor. There were only a few days left before they could enter the Eastern Deity Island. Who knew what would happen on the Eastern Deity Island if he were to offend Jun Qiuyan here? He understood this quite clearly. While Jun Qiuyan did not say it clearly, for something like that, he just needed to realize it himself. Yi Futian circled the Penglai deity lake one more time, and did not find the item that he wanted. After that he left the place. "It looks like not many treasures can catch the pavilion head's eyes," said Emperor Helion to Yi Futian with a laugh. Yi Futian did not deny it. It was true. Not many treasures caught his eye. However, once they get out of Eastern Deity Island, more good things will probably be available. Emperor Helion then continued and said, "Of course, most people will not be willing to put them up for sale, but there are bound to be exceptions." Yi Futian's group left the Penglai deity lake and met up with the others outside. They prepared to leave the place when suddenly, several ladies covered in white robes appeared. The ladies were elegant and looked otherworldly, and they attracted a lot of people's attention. "Deities of the Eastern Deity Island," someone mumbled quietly. Yi Futian also recognized them. These girls were also among the deities of the Eastern Deity Island, who went to issue their invite at the Dongyuan Pavilion. They seemed to be headed straight towards Yi Futian. They stopped in front of Yi Futian and clasped their hands together to greet him, greeting the head of the Dongyuan Pavilion. "Is there something the matter, dear deities?" Yi Futian asked. "Deity Bai invites you for a gathering," one of the girls said. Yi Futian changed his expression. This meant that they were there for him. As to how they were able to find him, it was not that surprising. The Eastern Deity tokens emitted an aura wave, and the people from Eastern Deity Island could use these waves to locate the Eastern Deity tokens. When they enter the Eastern Deity Island, they had to return these Eastern Deity tokens. "Where?" Yi Futian asked. "The Rain Deity Terrace. However, we might have to trouble you to head there by yourself, as we need to find and invite the others," replied the deity. Yi Futian looked at Emperor Helion and the others. Emperor Helion nodded and said, "The base of the Eastern Deity Island within the Penglai deity region." "That is fine." Yi Futian nodded. The deity by that the girl mentioned was most probably the woman who led the group that visited the Dongyuan Pavilion. "Thank you, Pavilion Head. Then, I shall take my leave first." After that, the deities walked past Yi Futian and headed toward the Penglai deity lake. It looked like one of those they were inviting was at the Penglai deity lake. "Let's head over there," said Yi Futian. Emperor Helion nodded and led the way. The Rain Deity Terrace was a famous location, so it was natural that they knew where it was. They leaped into the air, and within the void inside the Penglai deity region, cultivators continuously came in and out. Looking down from above, bustling with activities, people moved all around, and the place looked incredibly prosperous. They headed toward another location. After an hour, a celestial pavilion appeared in front of them, and the words Rain Deity Terrace were carved on it. In the lower portion of the Rain Deity Terrace, many people have gathered. They raised their heads to look up. Some of the people walked upward along the stairs. They were all invited guests. Yi Futian and his group looked toward the upper part of the terrace. A decent amount of people had gathered there. As a sign of respect, Yi Futian's group landed on the ground first, before moving upward along the stairs. Someone came to greet them, and brought them up to the top of the Rain Deity Terrace. By then, many cultivators had gathered around the Rain Deity Terrace. They sat in an arc at different locations. There were a lot of seats, and it was very spacious. The number of practitioners and cultivators in each direction was not too high, and the woman who helped to guide them brought them to a location to be seated. Yi Futian raised his head to look forward. As he had expected, the woman who went to Dongyuan Pavilion to invite them in the past was leading the event. She looked as stunning and extraordinary as a deity. This woman was called Bai Mu, a practitioner of the Eastern Deity Island. The Eastern Deity Island would send envoy deities, once every decade, to all the continents to invite practitioners to enter their island. The people who arrived today were all invited by Bai Mu. She knew the locations of all the Eastern deity tokens that she handed out. As Yi Futian headed for his seat, many gazes were cast in his direction. The leaders of most of the attendees were on the older side. People as young as Yi Futian were incredibly rare. Many assumed that he was the heir of some top faction. Eastern Deity Island, Bai Mu. I have not yet asked for your name, pavilion head. Bai Mu said as she looked at Yi Futian. Yi Lionian, replied Yi Futian. A middle-aged person on the side asked, which pavilion's head? Dongyuan Pavilion, answered Yi Futian. Dongyuan Pavilion. Many in the surroundings showed a surprised expression. While they came from continents from all over, some of the continents knew that the Dongyuan Pavilion was similar to them. One of the holy lands that were built after the great emperor instructed that they needed to spread their ideals. However, why was the pavilion head of the Dongyuan Pavilion so young? The Eastern Deity Island will be open soon. As such, I went to the holy lands of every continent to invite you over to gather here. It is my honor to meet each of you. Pavilion Head Yi is the youngest pavilion head among all the heads over here. I can imagine that you are outstanding, Bai Mu said gently. Miss Deity, you are flattering me. I am very lucky, Yi Lionian replied. The other people were sizing up Emperor Helian, and the others standing beside Yi Futian. They were wondering if Yi Futian was just a puppet used by these people. After all, when the factions of a continent failed to reach some agreement, they would usually elect a puppet to manage the Holy Land. However, in truth, the factions of the continent would control things behind the scenes. The previous Dongyuan Pavilion head should be Lu Han, isn't that right? How is he? Asked a middle-aged person. Emperor Helian had seen him before. He was the master of a neighboring continent. Lu Han went against the will of the great emperor and treated the Holy Land as part of his faction. He has been killed, Emperor Helian answered. So that's what happened. The middle-aged man smiled and did not speak. It was as if he had just realized something. He thought, it was an internal conflict after all. It caused the Dongyuan Pavilion's head to fall. And thus, they are now supporting a puppet. The people around them also had an expression of realization on their faces, thinking that they had understood the situation. So, does that mean that the continent where the Dongyuan Pavilion is situated did not have any suitable person to become the new head? A voice emerged from afar. Everyone shifted their gaze to look back. Then a figure appeared from the sky. The person did not arrive on the ground. Instead, he simply landed atop the Rain Deity Terrace. Many got off their seats and clasped their hands together before shouting, Young Master Jun has arrived. The person who came was the person whom Yi Futian had met not that long ago, Jun Xiuyan. Jun Xiuyan was actually also invited here. When he spoke, he did not look in the direction of Yi Futian's group. Instead, he looked at Bai Mu. He landed on the ground directly opposite Bai Mu at the banquet. Then, he clasped his hands together and said, Jun Xiuyan is meeting deity Bai. Young Master Jun, you don't have to be so courteous. Bai Mu continued to speak in a relaxed manner. Please take a seat. Thank you. Jun Xiuyan sat down. He scanned the crowd. After that, his gaze stopped when he saw Yi Futian. He smiled and said, Who would have thought that we'd see each other again so soon? Yi Futian looked at him before saying, Indeed. It is quite a coincidence. Have the two of you already met? Bai Mu asked. We met each other not that long ago at Penglai Deity Lake. I admired Pavilion Head Yi a lot. However, I was not enough for Pavilion Head Yi. Jun Xiuyan laughed and said. Then suddenly, everyone's expression changed. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. A pavilion master who was foreign to the continent was looking down on Jun Xiuyan. Many people revealed suspicious looks. They did not believe it. There were a few people who controlled the holy lands of the continents next to Jun Xiuyan. Before this, they were trying to speculate Yi Futian's identity. They never imagined that he was just a pavilion master. His cultivation was also not very high. A pavilion master who was foreign to the continent was looking down on Jun Xiuyan? Many people revealed suspicious looks. They did not believe it. There were a few people who controlled the holy lands of the continents next to Jun Xiuyan. Before this, they were trying to speculate Yi Futian's identity. They never imagined that he was just a pavilion master. His cultivation was also not very high. Insolent! A voice cried out. The crowd shifted their gazes towards the direction of the speaker. They saw a very beautiful woman. It was Beigong Shuang, who was standing next to Yi Futian. You call that admiration? Beigong Shuang said as she looked at Jun Xiuyan. Why was it that she felt uncomfortable just looking at this person? Although Jun Xiuyan was handsome, he was a hypocrite. It was as though everyone had to obey his orders. He took offense at those who did not obey him, claiming that they were looking down on him. Shuanger, Beigong Ao said softly. He wanted to keep her in check. They were outsiders. The Jun clan was not just powerful. They were the hosts of the Punglai continent. Stirring up conflict with the other party here was definitely not wise. Beigong Shuang looked at him coldly and did not say any more. Yet at that moment Jun Xiuyan looked towards her. He was not angered and still casually asked, "Could it be that it isn't so?" Beigong Shuang wanted to respond, but Beigong Ao kept her in check with a glance. The atmosphere became somewhat awkward for a moment. Right then Bai Mu said, "Everyone is here for Eastern Deity Island. Since we are all friends of Eastern Deity Island, let us put these unhappy thoughts behind us." She was trying to lighten up the atmosphere. With a smile, Jun Xiuyan said, "Goddess, you worry too much. There are no hard feelings here. I was only asking, out of curiosity, why she said this was not admiration." Yi Futian frowned. Bai Mu had already tried to mediate so intentionally, yet Jun Xiuyan still was not willing to let it go. Although his tone was calm, and he seemed indifferent, his status was still up there. Such a line of questioning was him wanting them to yield and actively explain themselves. How should Beigong Shuang respond now? The crowd could also tell that Beigong Ao was keeping Beigong Shuang in check. At that moment, many people were looking towards Beigong Shuang. They seemed to be waiting for this proud and beautiful woman to actively back down. Jun Xiuyan wanted to make her yield. A few days later, we will be heading over to Eastern Deity Island to train. When the time comes, why don't you join me and train on the island? Yi Futian suggested as he looked at Jun Xiuyan. Once he said this, the space immediately fell into an eerie silence. Yi Futian wanted Jun Xiuyan to accompany him to the island to train? Who was Jun Xiuyan? Yi Futian, the pavilion master of the Dongyuan Pavilion, who was most likely a puppet pavilion master, was inviting Jun Xiuyan to accompany him? At that moment, many people had a bizarre look in their eyes. They seemed to be unable to comprehend what was going on. Once one cultivated to the level of Ren Huang, no one was a fool. To train in the divine prefecture, one needed to have the wisdom to survive. Yi Futian's words would undoubtedly offend Jun Xiuyan deeply. Was he giving Jun Xiuyan a slap to the face in public? Even Jun Xiuyan was stunned. He seemed very surprised that these were the words he ended up hearing. He looked at Yi Futian and felt somewhat strange. He never imagined that someone would say such things to him. All right. When the time comes, I will accompany Pavilion Master Yi to Eastern Deity Island. Jun Xiuyan replied, not getting angry. In fact, he still revealed a plain smile as he answered Yi Futian. It was as though he was conversing with an old friend. It seems that my admiration has been reciprocated. From the looks of it, I was indeed discourteous before this. You are so open-minded. I truly cannot match you in manners, Yi Futian said with a smile. He was similarly indifferent, as though he had no ego. Even after hearing his words, the crowd still did not understand what was going on. Jun Xiuyan probably invited Yi Futian to accompany him to Eastern Deity Island before this, and was rejected, causing Jun Xiuyan to be somewhat displeased. Hence, such a scene had occurred. Of course, the crowd would not find fault in what Jun Qiuyan did. With his status on the Penglai continent, he was naturally qualified to invite the Dongyuan Pavilion master to join him. Conversely, was Yi Futian worthy of inviting the young master of Jun clan to accompany him to the Eastern Deity Island? Their statuses were originally unequal. Without any verbal conflict, this secret rivalry seemed to have been resolved by the facade put up by these two individuals. However, the crowd understood that from the moment Jun Qiuyan followed up on what Yi Futian said, Yi Futian had already offended Jun Qiuyan. There would most likely be a follow-up to this matter. Beigong Ao looked at Yi Futian, seemingly wanting to say something to him, but ultimately hesitated from doing so. Beigong Shuang did not seem to mind. Although this woman had cultivated up to the Runhuang plain, she gave Yi Futian the feeling as though she had never experienced the brutality of the cultivation world. Pavilion Master, Jun Qiuyan did not want to let things go before. It is apparent that this person is extremely proud and wants us to lower our heads to him. Pavilion Master's words are undoubtedly a public retaliation. Although he did not flip out on the spot, he most likely will remember this, Emperor Helion warned. After entering Eastern Deity Island, please be careful of this person. Emperor Helion was clearly also somewhat concerned, and was intentionally reminding Yi Futian. Yi Futian replied by transmitting his thoughts. Prior to this, he did not want to make a fuss and had endured it. He had no need to come into conflict with the other party. Yet, he had not imagined that Beigong Shuang would speak up. Since Beigong Shuang had stood out, he could only stand out in front of her. He could not just leave Beigong Shuang to bear the consequences. Beigong Ao seemed to be somewhat worried. Even though he was a clan leader, there were too many powerful forces in the Divine Prefecture. Most of the time, they had to endure hardships. On the other hand, cultivators like Yi Futian, who had no family nor affiliation, could act freely and were unrestricted. In the top seat, Bai Mu looked at Yi Futian with a profound look. She felt that it was strange for Yi Futian to have countered Jun Qiuyan so directly. By doing so, it would be extremely disadvantageous for Yi Futian on his journey to Eastern Deity Island. However, she had no relations with the two parties. Their Eastern Deity Island would not participate in such matters. There will be a few fateful encounters of the Great Path on this journey to Eastern Deity Island. You are all powerful cultivators from various continents. After you enter Eastern Deity Island, I hope you all can reap benefits while you are there. If there are cultivators from any force who wish to train on the island afterward, you can come find me, Bai Mu said as she shifted the topic of the conversation to prevent them from continuing to dwell on the dispute before. I have always yearned to visit Eastern Deity Island. I have heard about it for many years, Jun Qiuyan said. 10 years ago, I wanted to go there. It was just that, at that time, my cultivation was limited, and my father did not allow me to do so. This time, I will be sure to take a good look around the island. I might truly be able to train with Goddess in the future. As he said this, he looked at Bai Mu with a gentle smile. It was as though he had already forgotten what had happened just now. If Sir Jun says so, I will await your arrival, Bai Mu replied. This time, Bai Mu had invited the crowd over with no real agenda in mind. It was just a simple banquet to familiarize the cultivators with each other. They might come in contact in the future. However, because of the incident between Jun Qiuyan and Yi Futian's group, the atmosphere of the banquet was somewhat awkward. Even though no one mentioned the incident afterward, it still affected the mood. Yi Futian and his group were naturally ostracized. Friction had occurred between a group of cultivators from the Dongyuan Pavilion and Jun clan, both of which were the local top forces of the Penglai continent. How would the other forces take it? Without a doubt, from their point of view, the actions of Yi Futian's group were impulsive and foolish. Yi Futian's group would very likely pay a high price for this impulse. The cultivation world had always been cruel and merciless. After staying for a while, Yi Futian took the initiative to bid farewell and left. He was somewhat bored from staying here. He would rather stroll around the Penglai deity region. Bai Mu also did not keep him here, allowing Yi Futian's group to leave. After they left the Rain Deity Terrace, Yi Futian asked Beigong Shuang, "Why did you speak up?" I could not stand him, so I said something. Do I need any other reason? Bei Gong Shuang answered as she looked at Yi Futian. That is true, Yi Futian replied as he had no counter to her reasoning. Before this, when I was training with you in the Dongyuan Pavilion, were you also thinking of a reason? Why do you make it so complicated when you consider things? Don't we do what we want to when cultivating? Bei Gong Shuang continued as she looked at Yi Futian with her beautiful eyes. Back then, I just wanted to watch you train, so I followed you. Yi Futian looked deeply at Bei Gong Shuang. Was he overthinking things then? Bei Gong Shuang always had the heart of a child, and was not tainted by the outside world. He looked somewhat bizarrely at Bei Gong Ao. He naturally could tell that this family head of Bei Gong family was a sly old fox. How was it that he protected his daughter so strictly? Bei Gong Ao, who was standing behind, was smiling bitterly now. He had indeed been tainted by the ways of the world, and was no longer pure of heart. It would be very difficult for him to redeem himself. After his little daughter, Bei Gong Shuang, was born with outstanding talent, he had made sure that she would not be sullied by the ways of the world. Hence, Bei Gong Shuang's cultivation progressed at an astonishing rate. Her talent was exceptional. When Yi Futian appeared, Bei Gong Ao deduced that Yi Futian was certainly an extraordinary person. Hence, he had sent Bei Gong Shuang to train in the Dongyuan Pavilion. In reality, he had done this out of self-interest. However, Jun Shuyan might have Bei Gong Shuang on his radar now. This made Bei Gong Ao somewhat worried. This family head of Bei Gong family, who usually showed no emotion, now had a faint look of worry and concern on his face. Pavilion Master, I wish to send Shuanger back, so she won't be entering Eastern Deity Island, Bei Gong Ao requested. Of course, I will accompany Pavilion Master into Eastern Deity Island. When Yi Futian heard Bei Gong Ao's words, he understood the other party's concern. He felt somewhat strange. Prior to this, he actually looked down on Bei Gong Ao. Unbeknownst why, sly old fox although Bei Gong Ao still remained the same, Yi Futian had some admiration for him now. In the cultivation world, everyone had their own methods for survival, regardless of whether they had strong or weak cultivation. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. No. Yi Futian had yet to respond when Beigong Shuang immediately rejected this suggestion. She continued, I will not go back. Shuanger, Beigong Ao said as he looked at her. He had a stern look on his face. No. Yi Futian had yet to respond when Beigong Shuang immediately rejected this suggestion. She continued, I will not go back. Shuanger, Beigong Ao said as he looked at her. He had a stern look on his face. Beigong Shuang, on the other hand, had an exceptionally stubborn look on her face. She shook her head, not heeding her father's suggestion at all. Senior, why don't you go back with her? Yi Futian suggested. The opening of Eastern Deity Island is considered a fateful encounter. Besides, would Pavilion Master also head back? Beigong Ao asked Yi Futian. I wouldn't. Yi Futian replied as he shook his head. He looked at Beigong Ao and said, however, Miss Shuang has already proven her way. Senior should let her make her own decisions. Beigong Ao was stunned as he looked at Yi Futian. Aside from his daughter's cultivation, he had indeed placed more restrictions on her regarding other matters. What Yi Futian said was not without reason. However, this time, he still hoped that Beigong Shuang would leave. He could foresee hidden dangers ahead. As the family head of Beigong family, Beigong Ao felt that he was a very accurate judge of character. Jun Shuyan was not a good man, and he was extremely proud of himself. Prior to this, due to the fact that Jun Shuyan had been rejected by Yi Futian, he had tried to make Yi Futian and Beigong Shuang yield to him. Moreover, he had been contradicted, and Yi Futian had even asked Jun Shuyan to accompany him to train on Eastern Deity Island. With Jun Shuyan's prideful nature, how would he take all this? Yet, Jun Shuyan only smiled and let it go. Nothing had happened. Beigong Ao did not believe that this matter would end just like that. The more the matter appeared to be over, the more likely Jun Shuyan would take action against them later on. Although Yi Futian's group were top figures of their own continent, the young master of Jun clan, the top clan of the Penglai continent, would not necessarily see them as equals. When we enter Eastern Deity Island, try to stay close to me, Yi Futian said to Beigong Shuang. Beigong Ao was stunned. He gave Yi Futian a strange look. Beigong Shuang also looked at him. She gently nodded her head and answered, Since Yi Futian said so, Beigong Ao did not say any more. From Yi Futian's words, Beigong Ao faintly felt the powerful self-confidence that Yi Futian had. Let's go, Yi Futian said as they left the area and found a place to stay. There were more and more members of the Penglai deity region around them. The place was lively. Countless cultivators had come to prepare to enter Eastern Deity Island. Be it in the air above or on the streets below, their surroundings were filled with people. It was a grand scene. In the blink of an eye, there was only a day left to the opening of Eastern Deity Island. The cultivators from various continents had already made preparations. There were more and more business zones in the Penglai deity region. Many cultivators were completing transactions for treasures all the time. Right now, at an open-air wine bar on the rooftop of a pavilion, Yi Futian, Emperor Helion, and the others were quietly drinking there. They looked down at the crowd below, as well as the cultivators traversing the sky above their heads. Yi Futian was also slightly moved by this scene. After cultivating for many years, even though Yi Futian had already encountered many top figures, even having encountered Princess Donghuang, as well as the divine generals beside her, he still had yet to see an occasion where there were so many powerful cultivators. Even during the war between a few god-level forces back then, their numbers paled into insignificance when compared to the number of Renhuangs in the Penglai deity region. After all, this was a gathering of cultivators from thousands of continents. One could imagine how many cultivators were here. Even Emperor Helion was moved when he saw this scene. He said, having cultivated until now, we always have a misconception. Sometimes we believe that we have cultivated to the peak. After all, we are already upper-level Renhuangs. Yet, after we see such a grand scene, we will feel that we still have a long way to go. There is no end to cultivation. Even the great emperor does not dare to claim that he has cultivated to the peak, Beigong Ao said in a low voice. He knew his place. On their own continent, they could act more presumptuously, as they indeed stood at the top. However, when they came out, They needed to be more reserved and keep a low profile. There were too many powerful figures in the cultivation world. Setting aside other people, even the previous Dongguan Pavilion master, Lu Han, had been killed. Even Yi Futian with a third-tier divine will could kill off Lu Han. Although he had not directly taken action to kill Lu Han, everything was indeed set in motion due to Yi Futian, and this resulted in the fall of Lu Han. If Yi Futian's ability was only that of an ordinary lower-level Ren Huang, who would bother with him? He would not have been able to touch Lu Han at all. Up until now, Yi Futian's identity was still unknown. He gave off a mysterious vibe. In the Donghua domain, who is the strongest? Yi Futian suddenly asked. He seemed to jump topics in conversation, causing Emperor Helian and Beigong Ao to both be stunned. They were still on Penglai Deity Island. Why had Yi Futian jumped to talking about the Donghua domain? The Donghua domain is too large, Emperor Helian lamented as he looked into the distance. The 18 domains in the Divine Prefecture were all domains with more than 10,000 continents. There were countless cultivators on these continents. There were also innumerable top figures. That's true. In the Donghua domain, beside us, even the clans of Penglai Deity Island cannot be considered among those at the top, Beigong Ao added. There are too many powerful cultivators in the world. Each of them are astonishing figures. As for who is the strongest, how would we know? It might be the domain chief. Yi Futian nodded his head slightly as he vaguely understood. Although Emperor Helian and Beigong Ao were upper-level Renhuangs, the circles that they came in contact with were still limited. They were not that familiar with the figures at the top. Yi Futian did not know how powerful the domain chiefs of the 18 domains in the Divine Prefecture were. They might be on par with Spear Emperor Duyu, who appeared in the original realm. The Divine Prefecture was so big. It must be the same for the worlds ruled by the Dark Court, the Devil World, and other forces. From the looks of it, Yi Futian still had to increase his cultivation as fast as possible. With a third-tier divine wheel, he could still survive in these ordinary continents. However, in the core domains of the Divine Prefecture, his cultivation would be insufficient. While they were talking, in a nearby pavilion, Helian Yu and Beigong Shuang were strolling leisurely. They wanted to check out to see whether there was anything they needed. There was a very large trading house with many counters. Many people were carrying out transactions here. Their cultivations were all very powerful. Beigong Shuang stopped by a counter and looked at a thunder spirit orb. It emanated terrifying lightning to its surroundings. It seemed suppressed, and if it could explode at any moment. You can refine this item into your spiritual soul. It can increase your control over the way of thunder. Would you like to consider it? The owner of the orb recommended as he looked at Beigong Shuang with a smile. How much does it cost? Beigong Shuang asked. This thunder spirit orb is equivalent to a 5th-tier treasure. I will need to trade it for a ritual implement of the same level with spatial attributes, the other party replied. A transaction at this level usually involved the exchange of treasures. Each person would have their own requirements. Can I test it out? Beigong Shuang asked. Sure. The other party nodded his head. Beigong Shuang extended her palm and grabbed hold of the orb. Immediately, the terrifying power of lightning coursed up her arm. She instantly retracted her arm, trembling slightly. This orb should be fine, said Helian Yu, who was beside Beigong Shuang. Helian Yu was a middle-level Renhuang, and she had also sensed the power of the orb. Beigong Shuang nodded in agreement. She then took out a storage ring and placed a treasure within it. She then handed it over to the seller. After the seller took it, his will reached into it. Beigong Shuang's gaze was still fixed on the thunder spirit orb. Miss, why did you hand me an empty storage ring? At that moment, the other party asked this question. Beigong Shuang was stunned. She took the storage ring from the other person, and her will entered into the ring. As expected, there was nothing within it. Her expression changed slightly, turning somewhat cold as she stared at the seller. The moment the seller placed the storage ring into his sleeve, he must have used some trick to extract her item. The item was already removed from the ring. Helian Yu looked at her, and Beigong Shuang said, I gave him the item. Helian Yu's expression also turned cold. She immediately waved her sleeve and took the Thunder Spirit Orb. She coldly stated, "I will pretend that you were just joking." Presumptuous. The other party immediately cried out when he saw what Helion Yu did. A rampaging aura swept out. The long robe on his body expanded outwards. The storm of the Great Path bashed against Helion Yu and Beigong Shuang. They were both knocked back from the shockwave. What's the matter? At that moment, cultivators happened to descend from mid-air. Their auras were terrifying. Their pressure immediately enveloped the space. The leading dignified middle-aged cultivator had an especially frightening aura. He was actually an upper-level Renhuang. When Helion Yu raised her head and saw this scene, her expression changed. She knew that they had fallen for a trap. The other party had set this up and had been waiting for them. Otherwise, things would not be so coincidental. Without any hesitation, Helion Yu unleashed her will. They were not far from where Yi Futian and the others were. Her will could reach them. After all, they had offended other parties a few days ago, so they were not so careless and would look out for one another. Unfortunately, at that moment, a ritual implement appeared in mid-air and immediately sealed off the vast space, cutting off her will. Someone tried to take a ritual implement by force and broke the rules of the trade. I will temporarily seal off the space. Everyone, please excuse this inconvenience, the majestic middle-aged cultivator said loudly in mid-air. His tone was cold and indifferent. He shot a glance towards Helion Yu. His cold pupils contained a murderous intent. This woman had an extraordinary temperament and was beautiful. However, she still needed to die. This wasn't good. Helion Yu looked at the other party. She could sense the murderous intent in the other party's eyes. She dragged Beigong Shuang and immediately retreated, wanting to leave this space. However, cultivators with frightening aura descended all around them, not allowing them to escape at all. In midair, the eyes of the majestic middle-aged cultivator revealed a murderous intent. He then coldly said, "For coming to the Punglai deity region and stealing, you shall be killed without mercy." He had barely said this when murderous intent enveloped the space. Murderous auras instantly burst forth from the surrounding cultivators in midair at the same time. In an instant, Helion Yu and Beigong Shuang were in grave danger. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Streak after streak of attacks continuously erupted. They had no hesitation, and each strike was executed with a full intent to kill. Furthermore, among these people, there were quite a number of middle-level Renhuang. Their simultaneous attacks had enough destructive power to annihilate everything in that space and slay everything happened in the blink of an eye. Streak after streak of attacks continuously erupted. Could not process they had no hesitation, let alone each strike was executed with a full intent to kill. Surrounding and protecting them. Among these people, you could not help but feel that a few moments ago, Renhuang, she was just simultaneous attacks had enough destructive power to annihilate everything in that space. Apart from feeling that she had gotten extremely lucky, she also felt a chill run down her spine. Let out a panicked expression. The other party actually just emanated will of the great path to the start of the trade and used they were already after themselves from the relentless attacks. Of course, a typical trade would never be as violent as this. Did not even occur to them. She could guess who was behind this. Even if it did, there was no way they could pull it off anyway. Deity region. The practitioners had traveling in the space up above the sky, floating in the skies and looked downward. The dignified people in the surrounding area saw the bodies falling through the air and looked his upward. Eyes turned cold. Under their observant turning his gaze around, the devastating attacks column of rained upon the two beautiful from afar in the skies. The two of them were likely to be slain right there and then. They passed the crowd of onlookers. Nobody knew one could be so ruthless as to be willing to unleash such violence on these two beautiful women. Futian. Furthermore, and the rest everything happened way too quickly. Behind. It was although so he was away that for many a while, people did not know how to react. Within the effective they could not area even of process the divine what had happened. Shroud. Just as they the ruinous attacks were about to hit the just two, a thought, a terrifying sword will come to each other's area in an instant. At the moment the conflict broke out, a few rays of light broke through against any possible mishap. A soft splish echoed out, sword was already and the rays of light pierced through the heads of some of the attackers, to block all of the leaving behind a trail of blood. Then, Futian walked to Helian Yu and Beigong trajectory drawing out gorgeous as he asked. Eventually coming to a stop beside Helian Yu and Beigong Shuang. Helian Yu shook her head. Zoom. However, the three swords let out orbited around the two people at incredible speeds. Beigong Shuang also shook her head. Scary screen of she was in fact a little more composed than Helian Yu. Get close to the two women to harm them. She raised her head and looked at the people who were hunting her and softly spoke. All ranged attacks that were infused with spiritual power. I know. Were instantly shattered by the swords. He turned around and was even able to make a dent in the sword screen, emanating a powerful and intimidating aura unharmed. Are you going to defend them? Before the onlookers coldly regarded him so much and that even the virtuosos let their surprise show on their faces. The three streaks of sword was indeed a terrifying sword flew towards a certain location above at a terrifying virtuosos who had surrounded direction of the flight of the sword. The practitioner who was trading with Beigong Shuang retreated their fresh hastily, blood spraying about in the skies after the streaks being slain of sword by the traveled far more quickly and arrived in an twist that occurred in an instant. The spatial powers of the practitioner formed multiple doors of space, sealing his body in an isolated space. Zoom. The streaks of sword will pierce straight through, and the destructive storm of sword aura tore the doors of space apart. The space will of the way surrounding the practitioner was instantly destroyed. Sensing this, he could not help but panic. The three swords sliced across. Two of the swords pierced through each of his arms, while the last sword floated right in front of his head. He let out a cry of pain as fresh blood flowed down his arms. Feeling that both his arms had become crippled, he turned his infuriated gaze toward Yi Futian. But the sword levitating in front of his eyes continuously emanated a frightening intent to kill. And he could not help but fear death at that point. You only have 3 breaths time. Return the implement that she gave you, and I can spare your life. Or else I'll kill you, Yi Futian spoke. As he finished, his sword will let out a frightening intent to kill. At the same time Yi Futian shouted, 1. That Renhuang's face instantly turned as pale as a sheet. His heart froze in fear. The virtuosos around them were still in a state of confusion. This had all happened too quickly. First, there were some issues with the trade, and the other party decided to aggressively kill the 2 women. Yet at that point the tables turned instantly. Yi Futian acted, utterly dominating the trader, and took him down in a breath. He was going to kill the trader in 3 breaths' time. 2. Yi Futian continued. As he spoke, the Renhuang trader could not help but lightly tremble. He could clearly sense the intent to kill and the sword will increase. At this point, the dignified Renhuang leader turned his gaze to the Renhuang trader. A powerful aura seemed to press on that person. He still had 1 breath's time, no matter what he might have to face afterward. and if he did not make a decision within this breath, he could die. 3. The moment Yi Futian said the word 3, a treasure floated out from the trader. It was a Qingquan bag from which an implement levitated outward. It was indeed the implement that Beigong Shuang gave him. This is the implement that she traded, he spoke. His features were twisted in pain. If he had known earlier that this was going to happen, he would not have gotten himself involved in this messy business. This caused an uproar among the crowd of onlookers who whispered among themselves. It was actually the stall owner who hid the implement, and yet he slandered the other party. If this were only his plan, it would be very difficult to explain the strange behavior of the people who intended to kill the two women. Why would they decide to murder Helian Yu and Beigong Shuang straight away, without even investigating? The truth behind all these seemed to be quite intriguing. Splish! The sword sliced across, and a blood-curdling shriek echoed out. Wisps of sword wool were running amok in the body of the traitor. A short while later, the man lifelessly flopped down to the ground, his hair turning white in an instant, and his features aging decades in a matter of seconds. He had become a cripple after his cultivation has utterly been destroyed. Seeing this scene unfold before their very eyes, several people felt a jolt in their hearts. Such decisiveness, such callousness. He did not kill the traitor, but ruined his cultivation. Just now, Yi Futian's sword will had swiftly descended on the traitor, giving him only 3 breaths' time to consider his choices. Under those circumstances, there was no time for the traitor to consider any other choices, and thus his fate was already determined then. However, from this, anyone could tell Yi Futian's intense anger. While this white-haired youth might appear to be very calm, his methods were ruthless, and he could kill without hesitation. That traitor was also quite unlucky. He tried to set up a trap to frame the two women, yet in the end, he got his cultivation completely ruined. Yi Futian did not ask the traitor who had given him instructions. After all, he knew the answer even without asking, and so it was pointless to pose the question. The person in question was already present. What need was there to ask? His eyes swept across the scene, looking at the Runhuang practitioners who had attempted to take the lives of the two women. His sword will shrouded the boundless space. At the same time, a violent murderous aura emanated from Beigong Ao. If it weren't for Yi Futian's timely response, his daughter might have already been killed. The opponent was too fast and too cruel. In a split second, the atmosphere in the area became extremely heavy. It seems like it is a misunderstanding, the dignified Renhuang said as he looked at Yi Futian. He turned his sight to the crippled traitor below him, and, with an icy gaze, continued, "How dare you act like that in the Penglai divine region? You deserve death." As he finished speaking, a devastating strike descended upon the traitor. He was already a crippled Renhuang. How could he even defend himself? He could only look at the attack as it descended on him. Just as he was about to make a sound, he was swallowed up by the destructive attack. Not even his corpse was left behind. Seeing this, everyone shuddered internally. This was way too cruel and callous. A middle-level Renhuang first got his cultivation fully ruined, and was then killed. It was too tragic. This person is already killed and punished for his crimes. It seems like it was just a misunderstanding, the other party said as he looked at Yi Futian again. He spoke calmly, as though he intended to resolve the entire conflict with a sentence. These people were the law enforcers on the Penglai divine region. This law enforcement group was formed by the virtuosos from the select few top-tier factions in the Penglai divine continent, and they were in charge of the order of the Penglai divine region. Just this? Yi Futian asked. Upon hearing Yi Futian's words, the other party creased his eyebrows, frowned, and asked, "Then what else do you expect? If I came just a step later, would the two of them have been slain by you instead?" Yi Futian asked as he pointed at Helian Yu and Beigong Shuang. The other party gazed at him coldly and said, "You have also killed some of my men. Since it was my misunderstanding at first, I will not hold you accountable for this. This matter ends here." "This matter ends here?" Yi Futian spoke coldly. As he finished, a particularly strong sword will shrouded the boundless space above. It was as though the vast space above had evolved into a sword realm. An incomparably frightening sword will shrouded the 3 swords, and this caused the swords to become increasingly strong and emanate an unimaginably terrifying destructive aura. "What are you doing?" the dignified middle-aged man called out coldly. Futian swung his arms forward and icily said, "Go! Kill them." Just as he finished speaking, the swords flew out. "Back off," the middle-aged man said loudly. A sword pierced through a Renhuang's body, and the Renhuang was sent flying backward while still stuck to the sword. After a short while, his body was pulverized to nothingness by the sword will. However, the sword did not stop but continued forward. The sound of sword-piercing bodies did not cease. In this destructive sword realm, Renhuangs were slaughtered one after another. No matter what they did to try to retaliate, their endings were all the same: instant death. The dignified Renhuang let out a rather frightening aura. However, in front of him, a thunderous storm gathered. The space in front of him has evolved into a cataclysmic thunder realm. Beigong Ao's eyes shot out frightening powers of thunder. These powers swept toward the dignified Renhuang, forcing him to defend himself, and thus rendering him unable to do anything to Futian. After the swords had swept through the group, there were only a few opponents left standing in the space. The others had already disappeared. This scene caused turbulence in many people, passers-by, and onlooking virtuosos alike. What a domineering practitioner! If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.